All right. Now we are, I don't know, podcast number 4 or 5. I don't even remember. But I have my first guest that's not Dave Ridley. This is Alu Axelman, and this is Russell again. Hey, Alu.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
And I don't think we've ever met in person,
Yeah, I'm trying to
have
think.
we?
I don't think I've met you in person.
No, because I have not lived in New Hampshire since like 2009, no, 2010 or something like that. So I don't think I've been to a place where you've been to meet. So how long have you been interested in secession?
That's a good question. I hadn't thought about it. I suppose I got involved in politics as far as being really involved, not just a casual pro liberty voter. I got really involved maybe 3, 4 years ago, probably 2016. And I think it only took me a year or two because I was constantly learning. It took me about a year or two probably to realize that this country is finished, the US is finished, and we're going to get into it throughout the podcast, I'm sure. But there's no hope for the US, there's no hope for any state. But maybe if one or two states have a prayer of retaining some liberty, the key is going to be secession to protect us, fortify that state in terms of liberty, and cut ties with the federal government and the other states, and try to preserve what liberty we have left in one or maybe two states. So I think it's been a few years now.
What was the stuff that told you, oh, this is all messed up?
Well, so around 2016 or whenever the primaries were, I guess 2016 with the GOP primaries, I was looking at Trump and Cruz and Rand Paul, and I don't really trust any politician, but I trusted Cruz and Paul more than Trump because he didn't have a record. Um, but I started following politics more and more, and I started writing, and I've published over 300 articles now. And in 2017, I was also on talk radio, so I was doing a lot of research, and I was writing articles and doing videos and podcasts throughout 2017, and I only got more and more intense every day since then until today. So now I'm doing almost full-time politics now. So I've been learning a lot, and the more I learn, the more I've become a pessimist because I've realized that every single state, and I follow policy in all 50 states, and almost every single policy, from taxes to guns to education rights to free speech and everything else, every single state of the 50 is moving towards leftist authoritarianism in almost every single way. I know that a few states passed constitutional carry and a few other things, but in almost every single way, every state's moving towards authoritarianism. Federal government policy is moving towards leftist authoritarianism at light speed, and there's no prayer for the country, and almost no state has a prayer. I think that the only states that are trending in the right direction, or at least somewhat neutral, are maybe New Hampshire, maybe South Dakota, and Wyoming, and I would cautiously say Florida if it were smaller, but it's too hard to control with 20 million people. But maybe South Dakota, Wyoming, and New Hampshire have a prayer of retaining some liberty. But other than that, the other 47 or so states are so beyond gone without a prayer, and the federal government's even more of a lost cause.
Yeah, so right now, Florida doesn't seem so bad, partly because of the COVID insanity. It's a little bit less there. And my dad lives in Wyoming in the summers. I've lived there before. I was born in Montana and grew up in Utah, so those are all familiar places to me. I travel around and move trucks, so I go all over the place. So right now, a lot of the plains aren't too bad, and South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana, Wyoming they all seem kind of the same. I mean, I can walk into a place in South Dakota and they will have local mandates, but nobody's enforcing them. So it looks very similar to other places. But like a place like South Dakota is better than Texas right now, and Wyoming too. Having been in those kinds of places, they're not actively getting better. They're just far behind, right? Why is New England the worst? Because it's where we began, right? And Wyoming's the best because it's the last place people have been moving to, right?
That's an interesting theory. I think that I may agree. Maybe there's a decent point in that correlation. But also, I think one of the biggest correlations that I've seen with how free a state or a place is just the population and the density. So Wyoming is I think the
Yeah.
least dense and the least populated state. And they happen to have either the most or second most freedom of all the states. And then you look at New York City, New York State, California, New Jersey, very densely populated, highly populated states where the politicians are further away and least accountable, and there's very little liberty. So I think that's also a very big correlation. But yeah, I find myself saying a similar thing about how some states are not better; they're just behind.
Yeah.
So we're not more free than Britain. We're just behind because Britain's 10 years ahead, maybe
Yeah.
in terms of fascism.
Yeah, I completely agree with all that. Yeah, like when I was in Utah as a kid, we were smashed between Wyoming and Nevada, and those were both, wildcat states compared to Utah, right? There's, you could go over to Nevada and do stuff you couldn't do in Utah, and you go over to Wyoming to get the fireworks you couldn't get in, that's just the way it is. And Wyoming is just one step behind Colorado and Utah for bad government. That's just the way it kind of goes. So that's cool. So you guys, you kind of gave up on the politics, gave up on the government the way it was, and were getting more radical in about 4 years ago. Okay. When did you come across NHexit or New Hampshire secession?
Well, I moved here in 2017, just before the winter. And I think by the time I moved here, I was pretty libertarian and pretty set on secession being the number one priority, I think, at that point already, but only more and more so every day since, because I realized that it's become the most important issue over time. It's not even like just one of the issues that we have to work on. It is the be all end all. If we don't secede in the next few years, maybe 5 or 10 years, we're finished. And New Hampshire will look like Massachusetts or New York City or Cuba. And we have to cut ties with the federal government as soon as possible. So a lot of important issues, but secession it's everything, because if we don't cut ties with the federal government, as we've seen, especially with COVID fascism, the federal government controls policy with so many different tools, from money to regulations to just bully pulpit. And maybe that's why Sununu's become a dictator, because the federal government is hanging billions of dollars in the CARES Act and stimulus funding over his head, and he has to make New Hampshire look bad, and he has to, say we have a lot of cases and lock us down, so he gets federal money. So the federal government is tied to so many authoritarian anti-liberty policies in the state. We have to cut ties for so many reasons. Cut ties with DC to be free.
Because we don't even see all the connections, do we? Because it happens behind the scenes,
A lot of it is probably totally behind the scenes, but a lot of it it's pretty out in the open. For instance, we know, if you just look at federal government or state websites, we know that pretty much every state agency gets money from federal agencies, right? Our HHS probably gets $1 billion a year, or in New Hampshire, probably a bit less, from the federal HHS, which is a grant every year, meaning it's also blackmail because it has strings attached, right? So they can say, we want you to do certain things and provide money for abortions in the state. Otherwise, you won't get that $1 billion in the HHS grant. Therefore, we think that the state HHS controls health policy in New Hampshire, but it's really the feds via extortion. And the same thing for the DOT, same thing for DHS. And I've written a lot of articles about how the DHS is giving money for sobriety checkpoints, but you have to do sobriety checkpoints in the state. Same thing with, I think, the immigration checkpoints on the borders of New Hampshire, which is the whole state is considered a border territory. Same thing with drones they've given to police departments throughout the state, and that's from the DHS, I believe. And it goes on and on from DOT, DHS, HHS, Department of Education. All the funding comes in, and with it comes strings attached, and we have to cut those ties.
When you do your writing, where do you put that?
On libertyblock.com. That's the website that I've been running for a few years now, since before I even moved here.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because I've read a bunch of your articles on there. And okay, so I'll put that connected to this video to help people find it. And so you've been doing that for 4 or 5 years, you think?
No, 2017. I made the website to host the audio from our talk radio show I had with Mark Stewart before I moved here, and that was called the Liberty Block. So we made libertyblock.com initially to host the audio clips so people could listen if they couldn't hear us on the radio. And then we started supplementing that with articles as well. And since then, it's become probably more articles than podcasts, but we're still doing both, a lot of both.
Oh, okay, cool. And when you guys do a podcast on there, what do you guys cover?
We have a few different podcasts, and we're pretty libertarian and disorganized, to be honest. We've had a few shows where we had a show running for 10, 15 weeks, maybe, just called Liberty Block Live, where I did it and some other guys on the team, Mike and Daniel, did it, where we discussed mostly news. They didn't live in New Hampshire, so they were mostly national. Some issues in Arizona, Connecticut, Tennessee, national issues about Trump and COVID and all that. We have a show, EJS right now, the EJS podcast, about to do our 26th episode, and we've gone for half a year every week. So 26 weeks now. We've done it every single Wednesday. And they talk about also general topics in politics nationally, and they focus a lot on secession because the hosts are smart, so they realize that the only solution for the U.S. is dissolving the union. And then we have some other shows where I'll just go on and do a rant because I own the site, so I can do what I want. So I'll do a rant and I'll just put up a video or a podcast some random nights of the week if I feel like there's a certain issue I have to cover. So we have a few different podcasts and videos.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I listened to the 25th episode of that. It was right on the edge of too many young people talking at once for me. I'm getting to be an old guy. I'm 50, so.
Well, the three primary hosts, EJS, and that's the initials, EJ and S, those three are all right around 60. So I'm going to tell them that you said they were young.
60? I would have never guessed that.
Well, on that episode, if you listen to 25, it was them three. It was a guy named Mike, who's probably around 40, and it was me. So it was us five, I think. So you're right. It was a lot of people shouting over each other. That's definitely true. But the three primary hosts are all of the older age, the 60s.
And yeah, so I liked a lot of the stuff you guys are talking about. Of course, some of the politics you guys are talking, I don't keep up with. I've kind of given up on some of the politics type of stuff. And even inside of NHexit, I'm going to be interviewing people that know more of the current politics. I won't know it, but that'll be part of the reason to have the interview is to cover those topics, like with you and other guys. So that'll be cool. So with you, would you say Liberty Block is your main outlet on the internet right now?
Yeah, for sure. It's what I do. It's what I do with almost all of my free time. I write articles, anywhere between 1 and 15 articles a month. And I do podcasts and videos, and I'm trying to delegate more. And we have a bunch of awesome hosts doing a lot of podcasts and videos now too. But that I spend a ridiculous amount of time on the website. Yeah.
Okay. So anytime that I don't grab one of your articles related to NHexit type stuff, remind me or throw it on, the Facebook group or something like that so I can find it to make sure I'm trying to make sure I promote everybody, that's doing anything for our cause. So if I slack, you can say, Russell's slacking. Get my stuff out.
I will.
So that will be good. And with us, I'll try to interview you as many times as we can get, we could do it every week or two. My schedule's all over the place. You might have a set schedule, so we'll see how that, see how often we can do that.
Pretty crazy, weird, unpredictable schedule and pretty busy.
Okay.
But yeah, we should do this pretty often, somewhat regularly.
But yeah, you have a haphazard. You're like emergency guy.
Yeah, I'm a paramedic, and I just do a lot of overtime, and I have a lot of other projects I work on.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, I'll be keeping up with you mostly through Liberty Block and, stuff you do on social media, things like that. That'll be good. Cool. So when you're also running for office, right?
No, I did. That was a few months ago, the election.
Okay, so you ran for what?
For a state rep.
And did you win or lose?
Nope, I won the primary and lost the general.
And you run the primary with what party?
Republican.
Okay, so you won the primary. Was the person that you ran against, was he established or more of an incumbent or?
No, it was an open seat.
Cool.
The pro-liberty Republican passed away. It was pretty sudden, and I was recruited pretty quickly to throw my hat in the ring and run in the primary. And was a tough primary. There were two other pretty good Republicans, both of which had won office already in Hooksett, I believe. And I think I worked, super duper hard, and we had a ton of help from a lot of volunteers who won the primary. And then in the general, the opponent was a lady who's a pretty hardline progressive Democrat in town, who's I think been a teacher. So she's been in town for a long time. So she, I'm sure, has a bigger network in the town than I do. But still, the town leans conservative. So I had the advantage. And in fact, it was almost like a shoo-in, but I kept working hard. And then around 4 days before the election, they dropped some really effective attack ads on me, and they worked enough, and she squeaked out a win by a few votes. So around 4 days before, then 3 days before, then 2 days before the election, every day a new bomb hit of mostly exposing things I've said on Facebook and Twitter, because I've said controversial things, because being in media for 3-4 years now, everything I say is going to be controversial, because the things I say are going to be opinionated and strong, because that's what political opinion media is. So that's kind of another learning experience of you can't go from political opinion media to running for office.
Did they misrepresent you, or did they just take your most extreme things?
Yes and no. I don't. I mean, in some instances, I'm sure they misrepresented me when they said if I want to abolish Medicare, I want all people to die. But, you know what I mean? It's true that I want to abolish, essentially everything, especially the unconstitutional agencies and redistribution of wealth and theft. I do want to get rid of that. But then they put their own spin on it of he wants people to die, and he thinks all cops are murderers. So when you say it like that, they didn't fabricate much. I mean, some things they straight up did fabricate, but a lot of it, they kind of just took it and put it in a bad light. And when you show only a few screenshots of the billions of comments I've posted on Facebook, if you find the worst I've done in my life, I'm going to look bad to typical low information voters who aren't following this stuff. And they see that I'm a young, radical person who curses a lot online. Just some of the words I've said, because I've used 4-letter words online, just some of those words would turn off maybe half of the senior citizen voters in town. So,
Yeah.
it was overall, at the end of the day, I have to take responsibility for the things I've said, obviously. But their tactics of they didn't really campaign till the end. I worked my butt off knocking doors for like 3 months, because since before the primary, and the Democrat had no primary. So they only worked the last 4 days, and the only work they did was negative ads against me. But it was very effective. So it did work. But I lost. Thank God. I'm back to media, back to working 70 hours a week, making a lot of money, and doing all my hobbies and doing Liberty Block full time. So it's all for the best.
Are you going to run again, or? Oh,
I don't see myself ever running again. I think, for a lot of reasons, but right now, especially in this climate, the only way I could see myself running is maybe in 50 to 60 years, if me running can make New Hampshire independence happen, or if we're already independent and we're running for really just the state government as a sovereign state, then it'll be a different world. But in this world, I don't see myself running again for a whole bunch of reasons.
Gotcha. So you're saying that secession is the number one issue for you, disconnecting from the feds. So what's the most important thing, or what do you think is the next thing for you to do or us to do?
You mean the next step to making that happen?
Yeah. What do you think is the next thing?
Well, I think I've alluded to this in a few articles, and I'm working on a book. I've actually pretty much finished the whole first draft, but maybe one day in my dreams I'll publish it. Pretty much laying out the steps of how secession would happen. And here's how I kind of see it happening, because most people think that it's a crazy pipe dream and it's radical, and secession can never happen. I would agree that it's a tremendous long shot. Realistically, the practical steps I see happening, and the reason I think secession might be viable in our lifetime, is, like I said earlier, the federal government gives a lot of grants, but that money that they have is obviously stolen from taxpayers, from us and from the other 49 states. So they steal money from us, but they only give it back with a condition. Mm-hmm. It's like, if you stole my money and said you'd give it back only if I shine your shoes. So it's ridiculous. It's violence and extortion and theft. So ultimately, they have a lot of strings attached. And we've seen this with, I think, Montana with the speed limits, where the federal government threatened to withhold, I think, DOT funding. and a lot of other instances throughout the states where the federal government threatens to withhold a certain annual block grant in exchange for implementing federal policy or policy the federal government wants unofficially. So I think ultimately what's going to happen is we're going to have a reckoning. We're going to have a tough choice in New Hampshire when the federal government says, we steal money from you. We're only going to give you $1 billion back towards your DOT if you implement seatbelt laws. And then we're going to have a tough choice. Are we going to finally give in and make a mandatory seatbelt law and join the other 49 states? Or will we refuse the DOT funding, which is maybe $1 billion, which could really help our state budget, which is only $6 billion a year? Or even more, that's important, but we'd live with seatbelts. But what if they want to ban guns? We have President Joe Biden coming in now. And if they say they're only going to give the annual maybe DHS grant to all of our local police departments, only if New Hampshire state or cities start banning guns, are we going to take the money or are we going to cut off from the feds? So I think what's going to happen is, let's say we had, I don't know if Sununu has quite the spine to do this, but let's say we had a governor like someone like you or me, who is principled and has some backbone, or any conservative or pro-liberty governor. They would say, okay, we're not going to ban guns. We don't want your block grant. In fact, don't give us the money because we're not going to let you steal it from us in the first place. And we're going to stop paying federal taxes in the state. Once we stop paying federal taxes, we don't give them the money. They don't give it back to us. That is essentially the first step towards secession, right? Mm-hmm. So we're going to stop paying federal income taxes, and then the federal government's going to, it's going to get awkward. They're going to say, but you have to pay federal income taxes, and we're going to, show them the finger and say we're not going to pay federal income taxes, and we're not going to pay federal fuel taxes or other taxes. And then the federal government's going to say, well, then we're not going to give you any grants. And then it'll keep escalating. And then we're going to say, okay, we're not going to follow any federal regulations. The FDA can go to hell. The EPA can definitely go to hell. And that is secession, right? That is nullification and secession. So at that point, we already will be essentially seceded. And so that's kind of how I see it happening practically.
And you're talking about the biggest parts of it. The biggest connection is all the money they get from us, and then all the rules they give us. Uh-huh. So which way, how do you think is the way we get there? Changing people's hearts and minds, or through legislation? What do you think?
That's a tough one. And I don't think I have an answer, because some things you can't really use the system that legitimizes the corrupt system. You know what I mean? You can't appeal to integrity for an entity that has no integrity. If you're in an abusive relationship, you can't appeal to your abusive partner's sense of morality. You kind of have to just leave. And it's weird to say, but just leave. So is this going to happen through the legitimate route of legitimizing government, state governments, federal governments, by asking for permission? No, the South kind of tried to do that. NHexit is trying to do that. Texas is weekly trying to do that. Ask the government for permission to appropriately and legally secede. It's like legally rebelling. It's an oxymoron, right? It's a paradox. So on one hand, I would think that maybe, in my dreams, the state house and state senate and maybe governor can sign a resolution or something, or pass a bill to make ourselves sovereign. But I don't see many politicians at all, definitely not Sununu, supporting that, because, again, Sununu is so close to DC already. So it may have to come from the grassroots, from the people, whatever that looks like. And I'm not sure. But on the other hand, maybe it could be done through a somewhat legitimate legislative official route if the government just starts nullifying more and more federal laws. And we have seen this with, I think, Missouri, maybe Oklahoma, maybe Wyoming, nullifying federal gun laws. We've seen from the left, California, New York, New Jersey, a lot of Democratic states nullifying federal cannabis law. They've done that for a long time. Federal immigration law, they've done that for a while with sanctuary states. So there's definitely some precedent for nullifying federal laws, and that is the first step of the few steps. If there are 3 steps to secession, the first step is nullification. And the good news, if I could be an optimist for a second, is that we've already seen like 40 states nullify some federal laws.
Yeah, that's something that we actually know can happen. It's happened in the past. Do you keep track of the 10th Amendment Center stuff?
Very little. I see some articles come by once in a while, but I don't follow them a lot.
So I will be posting a lot of their stuff on the NHexit, social media and sites. So you'll see more of that, because, they're showing the examples that have happened in the past, and it's happening right now.
So
there,
the 10th Amendment Center is totally on board with nullifying
yeah, that's what it's about.
all federal laws.
That's what it's about,
Good,
nullification.
good,
Yeah.
good.
So, they bring up how during the Civil War, places like Wisconsin did not comply with the slavery laws. They just didn't offer any help, and then it even gets to the point where if there's federal marshals, you're not helping them or even opposing them, right? That was their way of saying, we're not going to do this. We're not going to return slaves. We don't recognize, just because you come up here and say that I own that guy, that doesn't,
Yep.
that doesn't count.
I think that's an easy win. And you just reminded me of the ATF. I don't know if you're following Paul Brady right now, but the ATF's apparently raiding Paul Brady and distributors and even some end customers who have bought Paul Brady's. It's the 80% lower kits for ARs and pistols that you can kind of finish out yourself. They've always been legal, but the ATF under the incoming administration is saying they're illegal now, apparently. So, or they're just going after maybe prohibited persons. But I think that maybe another simple, practical first step that could happen realistically in New Hampshire is the governor or legislators or local sheriffs saying they're going to refuse to comply with ATF or maybe FBI for, anti-gun policies. That's an easy win. If I were a sheriff, that's an easy win, especially in a Republican county, of saying, I won't comply with ATF and taking your guns. That's an easy one. We can go more hardcore than that, but start there and just start nullifying every federal law. If they're bad laws, they'll have public support. Even if they're good laws, say, okay, if it's such a good law, let's pass it on a state level. We don't need the federal law. So we can right now nullify 100% of federal laws, right? And just, if they're great, let's make them on state laws. And they might be redundant already in the statutes. Some states already have, redundancy with federal laws as well. But we can nullify all federal laws without any of us suddenly dying, right?
Yeah, we can live without them. So would you want to be like talking to people about themselves nullifying these laws, ignoring them or going around them, or try to do it through legal means?
I think to the extent that people can, essentially secede from the government on an individual basis, I think that they should, and that's, I guess, what agorism is or voluntarism. But again, it's very difficult. I have some friends who say that, who imply that they have more courage than I do because they refuse to comply with driver's licenses and drive without a license. But then when I blink, they're arrested or in jail the next day, and they have to get bailed out every other day. So is that reasonable? Maybe, and I commend them in a sense. I know a lot of pro-liberty activists do get arrested very often, and I commend them. They do have courage in a sense, but it's also maybe not practical. I don't know if it's overall a net good or bad for the liberty movement, but for someone like me as a paramedic, if I get arrested even once, I think my whole career is over. So I just can't afford to do certain types of civil disobedience. So I maybe I'm somewhat ambivalent or kind of both ways on that, on whether you should do civil disobedience and essentially nullify laws or disregard laws. It's good if you can, but many people are not in a position, either because of courage or their career or other status issues. They can't really openly violate a lot of laws, unfortunately. But it's a tough issue. It's a good question, because when I see people comply, and I just commented on I think Iraq veteran 8888's video, and they do a lot of great work for pro-gun rights, but then they said, you're allowed to build your own guns, Americans are allowed to do what they want, but as long as you follow all of the regulations and guidelines of federal gun laws. So,
well, weren't you also kind of talking about how there's some of these things where you can nullify where nobody really knows you did it, right?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that could be the first step.
Do it, definitely do it in secrecy. But as far as openly violating laws, I understand those who don't necessarily have the courage to do it at this point. So I kind of see both sides of that argument.
Well, also, if you're talking to normal people on the streets, they're not ready for that. But just even talking the first step of, well, maybe we shouldn't follow every federal law.
Yeah. I mean, people on the street jaywalk. So they're okay disregarding some laws. It's all a spectrum of which laws are okay to disregard. And everyone has their own inner morality or justification for violating certain things, right? Everyone can justify everything. And humans by nature justify their actions. Even murderers think that they're justified in killing. That's just human psychology. So most people, maybe 99% of people, think jaywalking is okay. I've written articles. I write a lot about traffic law because I want to abolish all traffic laws. And in studies by, I think, Purdue University, they found that 100% of respondents said it's okay to violate the speed limit. The only difference was is it okay to violate it by 20 or by 15 or by 10 miles per hour? But they all agreed that speed limits are all garbage, and 100% of respondents said that you should violate speed limits, and it's not a big deal at all. So people are okay jaywalking, violating speed limits, violating a whole lot of other stuff, maybe violating a mask mandate or pulling it down when it was not looking. So most people are okay with violating, at least 3 felonies a day, the book says. But it's an interesting point of psychology, because if you say certain things, like violating a gun law, most people cringe unless they're anarchists, and they're afraid. If you say violate tax law, most people will say, I don't want to mess with the IRS or go to jail. So it's very interesting. Some laws people are not willing to violate, and even I'm afraid of violating a gun law or a tax law. So, it's very interesting spectrum of who's willing to violate what.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is the most important or first area we should nullify between us, federal rules that we should not do?
Ooh.
You've kind of talked taxes and you've kind of talked, gun laws. What do you think?
I talk a lot about federal gun laws, and I really wish New Hampshire would pass a similar bill to, I think, Missouri and Wyoming have nullified federal gun laws, either for present or for future gun laws. They say they're not going to obey. So I think we should certainly do that. And I think
that would make sense. That's something that we could do inside the NHexit world. We could find all the other states that have gone farther than New Hampshire, and we could catch up to them. Right, exactly. That would be a good first step. You say, "Hey, Missouri's gotten away with this. Why are we letting free Missouri?"
Yep, I would love. I think next year, a legislator said they're going to propose that bill. Hopefully, and we'll help them when they do. So in a few months for the next session, they'll propose a bill nullifying federal gun laws. I think we can nullify some federal taxes. Maybe that will be taking some guts to do. But I also want to abolish or nullify FDA, so federal drug laws. I don't do any drugs, but a lot of people do, cannabis. So that would have a lot of support. So maybe that could pass in New Hampshire. Again, a lot of Democratic states have already led the way with nullifying and legalizing.
Well,
cannabis.
The FDA affects our food.
Yep. So we can nullify all the FDA. And I've written a few articles about that, how so many of the issues are not caused by the free market. It's the opposite. They're caused by regulations by the FDA. And I pay them $4 billion a year to do that to me. So they hurt me, and I'm paying them to hurt me.
Yeah, when you look at it that way,
Yep, the FDA actually, and no one knows about this one. We know about the EpiPen, the insulin, by them restricting supply and increasing prices by like tenfold. But very few people know about loperamide, which is Imodium, which is an antidiarrheal. It's something I have to take, and because the FDA destroyed the market, it increased the price by, I think, tenfold or eightfold or something. So they went from like $7 per pill bottle to like upwards of $50, $60, $100 for a bottle of these. So it kind of like hurt me, the FDA. And now I have to go to CanadianPharmacy.com, if you know what that means. Or I have to look elsewhere from outside of the country to get these medications, because ironically, the US is not the freest country in the world anymore. And we have to look elsewhere from even Canada or Asia for a lot of these medications that are cheaper and more available.
That's a funny thing, is there's so many people that do that. They're perfectly comfortable buying these things that are illegal here, but you don't think illegal? They're bad.
Is it technically illegal to buy medications from other countries?
Oh, I have no idea.
I mean, it probably is.
But I mean, you're saying something that the FDA has not approved, but you're willing to take it. You meet a lot of people like that.
That's true, and it's the same people. They'll speak out of both sides of their mouth, right? They'll say, "I trust the FDA." But then they'll order some of their medications from non-FDA foreign websites.
Well, maybe that's part of the thing, is just with the people you're interacting with and through your media, just helping people sort that out, right? Because your mind, you get a certain peace of mind when you stop having these dichotomies and these things, help sort it all out.
People are weird. I mean, most people are hypocrites in some way or another. I'm sure I am too. And it's hard to get through to them. People are stubborn, but people will simultaneously say they trust the FDA and government and politicians and the FBI, and in the same breath say they don't trust people like Comey and Senator Manchin and FDA people and what's his name running the FDA and Trump. So I don't know how they say both in the same sentence when they're polar opposites.
Do you feel like also we're going to be, depending on who becomes the next president, that determines part of who will be listening to us about going against federal rules?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I think we see a lot of that. Obviously, it's intuitive of when Trump's in office, the Democratic secession movements, independence movements are very, very strong. And when Democrats are in office, Republican movements like Texas gets as many as 300,000 signatures, which unfortunately is only 1% of Texas. But their movements in Republican states get strong when Democrats are in office, like under Obama. That being said, I do have to give credit to CalExit. I don't know if you know Marcus, but CalExit movement was not just an anti-Trump movement. I think they started like in the middle of Obama's term, and they've been pretty consistent on they want independence for the California Republic. Under Obama, under Trump, under Biden, they are going steady. I'm sure they had more signers from Democrats in California who were upset at Orange Man being bad. But they've been pretty consistent. So some movements are consistent. So maybe Marcus is principled on the left. I'm principled from the right, where I don't care who's president. It could be Biden, Trump, could be Kristi Noem, and everyone loves her. She's beautiful and awesome and conservative. But I don't care who's president. It could be her and Governor DeSantis, and it could be Rand Paul. I will still believe in New Hampshire independence because I believe in state independence on principle.
Well, even if you had the best president, that's not going to change the FDA. That's not going to change the ATF very much. It's not.
That's what I was saying for a while, and people said, "Nope, Trump's going to fix everything because he's crazy and he's not from the swamp. He's not a politician. He's going to smash the whole system." And they were right. He did shake up a lot of things and cause a lot of havoc and piss off a lot of people. And 4 years later, the progress he made was about maybe 1%.
Yeah. In my world, when Trump got in the truck driving world, all of the worst new regulations that were coming under Obama just stopped. They just stopped doing them. So, and then they haven't repealed anything, but they haven't given us any new crazy rules, like telling us when we can drive and when we can't, and when we need to take a nap. And then the other thing that I felt in my world was when Trump was doing stuff with China, some of the manufacturers, RV manufacturers or truck manufacturers couldn't get parts. So it slowed things down. But that's the only stuff that I noticed. In general, things were the same the last 3 years.
Yep, and because that's the thing. Even Trump, and he is, we'd all agree from the right and the left, he is the most bombastic, unpredictable non-politician to ever go to D.C., like maybe ever. And even he did essentially nothing about the FBI, the CIA, the FDA, the EPA, even the FCC, even though they said that that guy he appointed to the FCC was going to repeal net neutrality and destroy the internet, even though the internet only got faster since then. But he did very
well all about that.
Yeah, I remember that whole scandal of all the hashtags of save the internet or something. So he did almost nothing. I mean, he did the deregulation. I think he cut 17 regulations for every new one added, which is probably a very good thing, assuming there were meaningful regulations that they cut. But overall, of the billion issues out there, he maybe improved 1% of them, but he also did a lot of bad. He's essentially the most anti-gun president since Reagan, ironically, or since Clinton with the assault weapons ban. But he was worse than Obama. He banned bump stocks. He supported red flag laws, supported silencer bans, and now his ATF under his watch is apparently raiding polymer 80 factories. So
and
he's done a lot of bad.
So what are all the stuff so there's a bunch of things bad from gun stuff during Trump's term?
Yep. He kind of did what I can make the argument is the worst gun law ever. So obviously we all understand how laws come into effect. It's supposed to be legislation passed by legislators. So of course the Second Amendment is supposed to protect gun rights. We all know that's BS. It doesn't work. So it's useless. Might as well repeal it. But even if you're not going to pass a constitutional amendment to ban guns or a gun part, at least pass legislation, or at least have a court case, which is BS. They didn't. Mm-hmm. Under Trump's direction, the ATF reclassified a bump stock, which is a piece of plastic. It's a stock you put on. It's a butt stock you put on your gun that helps you pull the trigger faster. They reclassified this piece of plastic as a GCA machine gun, meaning it's totally illegal. So never before has anyone, not even Obama or Clinton, Bush, Reagan, or anyone, not even FDR in their wildest dreams, would have even imagined reclassifying a piece of plastic as a literal machine gun. So if you own the piece of plastic, you are in possession of a machine gun because of the Gun Control Act of 86, I believe under Reagan. All machine guns made after 86 are illegal. So if you own this bump stock, you own a federally illegal firearm and you go to jail forever. So that was under Trump, and even under Obama, the Obama Eric Holder administration, when he was AG, the ATF under them, they admitted that they can't have the ATF do this, but they need to pass a bill to ban bump stocks. So even they said they couldn't do it by regulatory reclassification with the ATF. They need to pass a bill, and Trump comes and does it and says, "Nope, I'm going to tell the ATF they have to ban bump stocks," and they did that. So that was really, really bad. And he's done a few other anti-gun stuff. So he's kind of the worst anti-gun president. So he's done a lot of bad. He's done some good for sure. The tax cuts was good, and deregulation and a lot of other stuff. I've written articles of a lot of good and bad he's done. He's probably the first president that I know of to stand up to China, at least a tiny bit. He tried. I don't think he was successful because Xi Jinping's too strong, but he tried standing up to China maybe, which is at least we should give him some credit for. Because the other presidents like Biden are probably owned by China, or at the very least are partners and allies with Xi Jinping. So, but I've been saying this for years, 5, 10, 20, 50 years. My dad's been saying this for decades. The U.S. can't be saved. And Trump showed us that no president, no matter how much of an outsider, it could be Rand Paul, DeSantis, Noam, it could be you or me. It could be Daniel Miller from Texas Nationalist Movement. No president is powerful enough. They just can't save the country. The country is beyond too far gone. Maybe 100, 200, 300 years ago, a president could have turned the country in the right direction, but it can't be saved now. That's why it's not worth going to DC to be president, not worth running for president, not even worth being in Congress, because congressmen have even less power than the president, obviously. So congressmen can do nothing. So even a senator cannot save the country. So that's why I encourage friends, and I successfully encouraged a friend a few months ago to not run for Congress and to instead run for state rep, because he was really considering a run for Congress from Wyoming. And I'm glad he didn't, because even if you do win, which is hard for a pro-liberty person who's a decent person to win, even if you do win, you go to Congress and you won't be able to do anything good.
Yeah, you just get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So it's what you're thinking won't change if Trump wins, obviously. And what you're thinking, will it even get crazier if Biden wins?
I think so. I think under a Biden-Harris administration, things will get substantially worse. Especially even 4 years ago under Obama, it was a different time. And the Overton window is shifting so fast, it's moving at warp speed. Yeah. So even under Obama, there were certain things that were starting to become acceptable in society. Communism was still a bad word. Socialism was going from a terrible word to maybe a somewhat acceptable word. Now socialism is more acceptable of a word in the US than capitalism. So things have shifted so quickly. The rabid anti-freedom, anti-school choice, anti-gun culture, pro-taxes, anti-free market culture. It's disgusting throughout the U.S. And again, there's a big dichotomy on the leftist coasts and big cities, and conservative and pro-liberty, libertarian states and small towns. But still, the average in the country is still moving very rapidly towards leftist, communist authoritarianism, and under Biden-Harris, with that mandate that they have from the 70, 80, 90% of the U.S. Voters supporting communism, leftism, and hating freedom, they're going to be able to do a lot of damage to liberty. So the good news is that we're going to have a lot of support and secession movements from New Hampshire to Texas and everywhere else. But this is our time. And I just told this, I was talking to TNM and some others the other day. I said, this is our time, especially for pro-liberty, libertarians and conservatives to secede. If we can't do it now, as Biden is, clearly fraudulently elected, and Biden takes office and said that him and Harris are going to start, destroying all freedoms within the first 100 days, because that's their priority, to eliminate freedom, obviously. If we can't get a good secession movement, at least getting some momentum now, we're never going to do it, I don't think.
Yeah.
Until it's too late and we're on cattle cars.
Yeah. What if we were to secede? Get a few steps along. What would you like to see New Hampshire be? Just like it was when it was before the Constitution, or would you want it to be under the current rules, or something else? What do you think?
That's a great question, and this is what I address in one of the last chapters of my book that I hope to publish one day in my dreams. After we succeed, then what? Is our state perfect? No. I think our state has probably run the best of all the states, because if you're familiar with New Hampshire legislature, it's a very big legislature. They pay very little. They're very accountable. We have public hearings. So it's a really good system. Considering it's government, it's pretty good. But it's still government, and that's the problem.
But you want to keep the same system.
Yeah, I would. The system, that's a tough question. In my dreams, we'd abolish it all. We'd have just freedom and total voluntarism. But we could keep the system as long as we can. We could try to use the system and the current legislative process to pass really, really, really good pro-liberty laws, such that the government has such a small role and power that their only power and duties and responsibilities and authority is to actually protect life and liberty and pursuit of happiness and property. If we can get the government back to being that small as it was in 1776, maybe, then I think, I'm okay with the government. And I've always said, people say you want to abolish the government, they're essentially right. But when people say I want to abolish the government, I say, no, I just want to, make the government respect consent and voluntary interactions, just like I do. I have to ask women for consent before I take them to bed, right? I have to get people's consent before I take their money or exchange money for products. Or I have to ask them for consent before I go on their property. Politicians don't have to deal with the same getting consent. So I'm fine with the government existing. State reps can exist. Police can even exist, as long as they don't violate consent and property rights. So that's kind of how I can maybe trick people if they say I want to abolish the government. It's not necessarily 100% true. I just want consent and property rights to be respected again.
So you think, for me, it's a good stepping stone. If we got it, if you had the state of New Hampshire, as a country disconnected from the feds and other international groups, it wouldn't be that bad.
It would be great. And like I said, we'd have a lot right away. We'd have more freedom because we wouldn't have those federal grants incentivizing the drones spying on us and the sobriety checkpoints and the immigration checkpoints and cannabis raids and all this crap that comes from the federal government, the federal Department of Education. We wouldn't have federal income taxes, which is another like $20,000, $25,000, $30,000 a year New Hampshire citizens pay to the federal government. So right away, things would get a lot better. We'd be a lot more prosperous because we'd keep another 20, 30% of our income. We'd have less regulations. We'd have so much more freedom. We wouldn't have federal money coming in to give to police to buy Bearcats to terrorize us. So right away, like you said, on day one, we'd already be infinitely more free.
But you're saying you are like a voluntarist or an anarchist?
Yeah.
Okay. How long has that been?
It's been an evolution. I was pretty conservative in 2016, 2017, and became more libertarian in 2017, 2018. Last year or two, just thinking about the principle of it. If I'm going to be principled, then I shouldn't support some coercion. I should support no coercion and full consent and voluntary, interactions. So, so it was kind of, I've always been very principled and very logical. So I kind of need to follow through on logic. And when I became conservative and more libertarian, it was kind of because I didn't want to be abused by the government, and I didn't want to pay such high taxes, and I wanted to pay lower taxes. Then I realized, if stealing half my money is bad, isn't stealing a tenth of my money also equally as bad? And especially from my upbringing, which was biblical, I remember learning constantly, stealing 1 penny is as bad as stealing, all the money. So theft is theft. So and that's how religions are. They teach theft is theft, and it's doing something wrong is doing something wrong. So if you steal $1 from me or $10 from me, they both are evil acts, and they're not okay. You have to respect property rights. A violation of property rights is a really terrible violation of a person. So that's when I started just thinking about the principle, and I realized I went from kind of libertarian, support small government and some coercion, some taxes to pay for police and fire departments and militaries, to realizing I shouldn't support any theft by force, any violent theft and extortion. And some people, the big reservation people have with voluntarism, of course, with everything being voluntary, is if we have no taxes, who will pay for the roads and who will pay for fire departments and police and hospitals and militaries? And then I realized, number one, that's not a good argument, because just saying that you need to steal money to pay for something doesn't mean that theft is okay. Theft is never okay. But even going further than that, I've published many articles about how very easily, and even some real life examples of how it's already happening, how things can be funded without taxation. Roads are built all the time without taxation in multiple different ways. Fire departments are mostly volunteer anyway, but also they can bill insurances for EMS anyway, and they can be funded voluntarily via ads, which we've written about a lot. Same with police departments. Even in New Hampshire, Manchester Police Department runs somewhat on advertisements from paying. People pay to be on their vehicles, advertisements, and they can do the same with their stations and all their vehicles and all their uniforms. And the military as well. People can volunteer to sign up, and they can buy ads and volunteer and donate. So everything can be paid for. But even if they couldn't be paid for with the free market, that does not excuse theft. So that's kind of how I became more and more principled, and that's how I became fully voluntarist.
Yeah, so you did the transition faster than I did. It took me a lot longer. For me, what pushed me over the edge was some of the Mises guys, Murray Rothbard, and then what pushed me over the edge was Tolstoy. But it took a long time. So, so that's interesting hearing your story.
The really rapid evolution. Yeah.
Now, so when you're talking to people and trying to convince them, what arguments do you use for how much better it would be not connected to the feds?
I think I talk about the grants a lot, and I explain to them, because people who aren't political insiders don't think about grants and extortion and all that. So I mentioned that, how they take our money and they give it back with strings attached. I mention the federal income tax. And in New Hampshire, I think that hits home with workers because we have no state income tax. So the biggest, by far, expenditure we have is the federal income tax. It's around a 20% effective tax rate for most New Hampshire workers, probably, which is $15,000, $20,000 a year. It's a lot of money. It's their biggest expenditure. So I think they understand that. If we cut from the federal government, we'd save $20,000 a year right off the bat. That's a lot of money. I discuss nullifying other federal laws. For some, it's cannabis they care a lot. Some it's immigration, some it's guns. And for a lot of people, I think the biggest one, I don't know what works. Clearly, I haven't been very convincing because I haven't convinced everyone in New Hampshire yet. But I think for a lot of people, saying, do you trust people? Do you want to be ruled by people like Trump, Biden, Bush, Obama, Clinton? Are those the people you want ruling over your life? And everyone says no, obviously, because people don't trust politicians. So I think that's a decent argument too.
Mm-hmm. And then if you had guys that were closer to you, they're not as bad.
Yep, much more accountable because you bump into them at the street and they have to be accountable to you.
Yeah, they're just not. When also in a future world of New Hampshire seceding, what do you think about for immigration and things like that? Other people joining us?
I think that's a great question. And I had to think a lot about immigration because that was a tough one. As I was writing my book, I had to think about it, and I realized the issues that immigration hawks have, of which I am essentially an immigration hawk. I'm not as open borders as many voluntarists and libertarians would be. I think if you have a state, you do have to have borders. Otherwise, it's not a state, or it's not even a republic. But I realized that total voluntarism, a truly voluntarist republic, would eliminate the three big issues of immigration. So the three big concerns we have with immigration, I'll try to remember them without my book in front of me, are the welfare, and welfare will be abolished in a voluntarist system. No taxes, no welfare, no redistribution of wealth. The crime of, some people coming in could be South American gang members, could be terrorists, and the Second Amendment, or our natural human rights to defend ourselves, will largely take care of crime from small to large, because we can defend ourselves, because in a voluntarist society, we're allowed to carry guns and defend ourselves. And the third issue is they took our jobs, which again, it's a tough issue. And this is kind of not even that partisan, because everyone is worried about jobs and wages staying high and not being undercut by South American workers or foreign workers who are willing to work for less. But again, it sucks to suck sometimes, right? If someone comes in and undercuts you, is willing to work for less and produce as much value as you, tough. You got to either work for less, make yourself more valuable, go to a less saturated market with more demand for workers, find a way to make more money. It's not my problem. So that one's not an issue to me. I know a lot of conservatives' biggest issue is wages, and the Republicans claim their principle. Then they say we need the government to protect our high wages. It's ridiculous. I was never big on government protectionism as far as the labor pool. If you're going to be undercut, you got undercut. It is what it is.
Okay,
I think it solves all those issues.
So when you bring up those three issues, when I think of New Hampshire being separate, I don't think any of those three are a real big problem.
That's what I mean, exactly. As a voluntarist, independent republic, if we are voluntarist, those are all non-issues. So we can have pretty open borders because there won't be any issues I could think of with immigration. People can come in, come out. They won't get welfare, and they will have to work. If they want to come here and get welfare, they're going to starve because there is no welfare in a voluntarist society. There's no government redistribution of wealth. So they're going to have to work. If they don't want to work, they're going to leave and go back to New York City.
Well, I'm thinking even before we got to that point, even if New Hampshire, as it is right now, was separate, would people move to New Hampshire to get welfare?
Probably not. We're one of the worst states for.
Well, yeah, and people get money from the federal government, so there's no reason for them to move to New Hampshire. People that live on welfare already don't move to Wyoming, South Dakota, North Dakota, and New Hampshire because they're not as good for those kind. No, people don't move to those places if they're planning on living off the government. I mean, we already have that right now, and I don't think that would change if we were separate. We wouldn't suddenly have a bunch of welfare people coming. They don't want to. They wouldn't want to come. So I think that first one's taken care of already. Even just under the current system. Then the second one of having dangerous people come from third world countries. I don't know why that would be more than it is currently.
It'll be the same. Yeah, no, it'll be the same.
I don't think it would suddenly get horrible if
other than maybe terrorists wanting to take advantage of the newly independent nation that they think might be weaker. That's not part of the U.S. It might be weaker now. But I don't think it would be a humongous issue.
Think of Caribbean nations right now, much weaker than the U.S. Are they getting flooded by third world assassins or terrorists? Right? I mean, think of all. I mean, the Bahamas is not a powerful country. Is it getting taken over by? I mean, yeah. I can't imagine New Hampshire being that much different than some of these smaller countries. And then what was the last one that you were mentioning? Oh, the jobs. Well, there's people that make less money in Mississippi right now than New Hampshire. But they're not rushing to New Hampshire and stealing the jobs already, right?
Yep.
Just like people can come from Mexico and go to New Hampshire just as much as they can to Texas.
Very interesting. Mississippi obviously has a better cost of living, but they make less. But New Hampshire has high wages and we're desperate for workers. So on one hand, we need workers. So our employers here do want more workers to come in.
Yeah. I mean, I can't. For me, if New Hampshire was to stay the way it is right now, but be separate from the feds, I don't think any of those three would be a problem.
Yeah, I agree.
We'd have more problems from the government of the federal empire, right? I mean, that's the people that would cause us problems.
That's what a lot of skeptics are afraid of. They're afraid they support secession, but they believe that if we secede, the federal government will go to 100% war with us and do whatever they can to destroy us.
That's the big big problem.
Yeah, that might be the biggest issue.
Yeah, and they won't want us taking away all that income tax and payroll taxes. That's a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
That's massive. So that's interesting. Well, and each one of us, it's good. I can talk to different people and kind of work through all these little issues and then figure out what they're thinking, and everybody brings up stuff you haven't thought of and all that kind of stuff, and get a feel for each one of us that's in this movement. So you know what? Let me wrap up our first recording here, and then after I stop the recording, we can talk about some stuff and make some plans for the next one.
That sounds great.
This has worked out great. Thanks, and I'll talk to you offline here in a second. Bye, everybody.